Pilkington pleaded guilty to one count of manslaughter.
The death of the children by pleading guilty to these charges today, and sincerely loves
that she's not the monster. The monster was in her home harming her for years.
In the quiet neighborhoods of Bel Fontaine, Ohio, life once moved at a slow, almost predictable rhythm. Rows of modest houses, children playing on front lawns, and the distant echo of church bells created an image of ordinary American small-town life. Yet behind the closed doors of one home, a darkness was quietly taking shape. A darkness that no one would fully see until it was too late. On a hot morning in August of the year 2015, emergency services were called to the Pilkington residence. Inside, they found an infant named Gavin, only 3 months old, unresponsive. Despite every attempt, he could not be revived. For many families, this would have been a singular tragedy. But in this household, Gavin's death was the third in a sequence that had stretched across just 13 months. The first loss had come in July of the year 2014, when baby Tristan, also 3 months old, was found lifeless. The second came in April of the year 2015, when 4-year-old Noah unexpectedly collapsed and never woke again. At the time, investigators considered the deaths inexplicable tragedies, marking them as sudden infant death or natural causes. But after Gavin, no one could dismiss the pattern. The odds were too impossible. As detectives walked through the Pilkington home, they found not only the silence of grief, but also a suffocating tension. This was not simply a family undone by bad fortune. This was a family imploding from within. Suspicion turned quickly toward the one person who had been present for every death: the mother, Brittany Pilkington. What followed would shake not only the town of Bel Fontaine, but also the entire state of Ohio. It was a case that blurred the line between victim and perpetrator, between jealousy and despair, and between love and destruction. This is the story of how a mother's envy, buried deep beneath the surface, erupted into an unimaginable crime. If you are drawn to stories of true crime and the search for justice, subscribe to our channel Echoes of the Court so you don't miss what comes next. To understand the tragedy that unfolded, we must first step back into the life of Brittany Pilkington. She was born and raised in rural Ohio, in a community where family structures often mask private suffering. Her childhood was not marked by joy but by instability. Accounts later revealed that Brittany endured abuse at a young age, and those experiences carved deep scars that never truly healed. She grew up with a fragile sense of self, struggling to form trust, longing for attention, and fearing abandonment. As she entered adulthood, Brittany married Joseph Pilkington. On the surface, Joseph was seen as a hard-working man trying to provide for his family. The couple's home soon filled with children: a daughter, Haley, and 3 sons, Tristan, Noah, and Gavin. Neighbors described the family as quiet, withdrawn, and ordinary. Yet behind the curtains, tensions were already mounting. Brittany's relationship with Joseph was far from balanced. She often felt ignored, overshadowed by the bond between Joseph and their boys. To her, the boys became rivals, not children. Joseph, perhaps unknowingly, expressed his affection toward his sons in ways that Brittany interpreted as rejection. Instead of seeing a father's natural love for his children, she saw proof that she had been displaced. In conversations with investigators later, Brittany admitted she was consumed by jealousy. She believed Joseph loved the boys more than her, and more than their daughter. To Brittany, this imbalance was unbearable. It stirred an obsession, a dark conviction that if the boys were gone, she might finally reclaim Joseph's attention. The environment in which she lived reinforced her isolation. With little outside support, and with the weight of her past trauma pressing against her present, Brittany's world narrowed into a dangerous spiral. The tragedy that would soon follow was not born in a single moment of rage, but in a slow-burning envy that metastasized inside her daily life. The stage was set, not for a random act of violence, but for a calculated unraveling. The deaths of her children would not appear as lightning strikes from nowhere. They would be the grim outcome of a psychological fracture years in the making. The first tragedy struck in July of the year 2014. Baby Tristan was only 3 months old when Brittany reported that he had suddenly stopped breathing. Paramedics rushed to the home, but the infant was already gone. The cause of death was labeled unexplained, an all too common entry on death certificates for infants. Family and neighbors grieved, believing it to be a cruel twist of fate. No one suspected foul play. 9 months later, in April of the year 2015, another call came from the same home. This time it was 4-year-old Noah. He had collapsed without warning and could not be revived. The town was shaken, but still, authorities did not press further. They considered it another incomprehensible tragedy, the second in less than a year. Behind closed doors, Brittany's jealousy grew sharper, while Joseph clung even more tightly to his surviving children, deepening the rift between them. The third and final act unfolded in August of the year 2015. Brittany called emergency responders again, reporting that 3-month-old Gavin had stopped breathing. By then, patterns could no longer be ignored. 3 deaths in just over 1 year, all inside the same household, all under Brittany's watch. What had once been considered coincidence now appeared impossible. In the hours after Gavin's death, detectives pressed Brittany with questions. Her answers faltered. The mask of grief she had worn after Tristan and Noah slipped away. During interrogation, she confessed. She told investigators she had used a blanket, holding it over each boy until their small bodies went still. The motive she gave was as unsettling as the act itself: jealousy. She believed her husband's love was directed too strongly toward his sons, leaving her and their daughter outside the circle of his affection. The words chilled even seasoned officers. A mother, resentful of her children, choosing to silence them forever in order to reclaim a husband's attention. The case was no longer a puzzle of medical anomalies. It was a deliberate, intimate crime. From that moment, the Pilkington home was no longer a symbol of quiet, small-town life, but the epicenter of one of Ohio's most haunting family tragedies. The community that had once embraced them now recoiled in disbelief. The question shifted from how these children had died to why a mother would choose this path. The confession Brittany gave was not impulsive. Detectives in Logan County carefully built the case, retracing each child's final moments and comparing them against her words. They confirmed that in every instance, Brittany had been alone with the children at the time of their deaths. The medical examiner reviewed the earlier findings and began to see what had been missed. Subtle signs that suffocation, not natural causes, had taken their lives. The investigation revealed a disturbing pattern. With Tristan in July of the year 2014, Brittany had been frustrated by Joseph's tender affection toward the baby. With Noah in April of the year 2015, her jealousy peaked when she saw the father and son bonding. And with Gavin in August of the year 2015, she acted again, believing it would finally shift Joseph's attention back to her and their daughter. Once the confession was secured, Brittany was arrested and charged with multiple counts of aggravated murder. Prosecutors announced their intention to seek the death penalty, describing the case as one of the most horrifying examples of filicide in state history. The courtroom quickly became the stage for a clash of narratives. On one side, the state painted Brittany as cold and calculating, someone who methodically eliminated her sons out of selfish jealousy. On the other side, her defense pointed to her troubled upbringing, the abuse she had endured as a child, and the mental health issues that had gone untreated. They argued that she was not an evil mastermind, but a broken woman trapped in her own distorted thinking. Experts in psychology were called to explain how childhood trauma can ripple into adulthood, warping emotions and perceptions. Some testified that Brittany exhibited signs of severe depression and post-traumatic stress, conditions that could impair judgment. But even with those factors, the deaths of 3 children weighed heavily on the scales of justice. The trial stretched on, delayed by hearings and debates over mental competency. Joseph, the father, sat through proceedings torn between grief for his sons and the reality that his wife, the mother of his children, was now the accused. The community filled the gallery, some seeking answers, others demanding punishment. When Brittany finally stood before the court to enter her plea, the air was thick with silence. Her decision would mark the turning point of the case and seal her fate. By the year 2019, nearly 4 years after Gavin's death, Brittany Pilkington faced the weight of the justice system. The prosecutors, determined to pursue the death penalty, laid out the stark facts. 3 children, each gone within 13 months, each suffocated by the same hand. The sheer repetition of the acts made the case almost unbearable to hear. In court, Brittany's demeanor was subdued. She often stared downward, her hands folded, avoiding eye contact with the families who once embraced her. To the public, she appeared emotionless, though psychologists later suggested she was dissociating, retreating inward to escape the unbearable reality of her actions. Her defense team knew that fighting for acquittal was impossible. Instead, they sought to save her from execution. They presented evidence of her traumatic childhood, her history of abuse, and her fragile mental health. They argued that Brittany's crimes, while unforgivable, were not born from pure malice but from a deeply disturbed mind consumed by jealousy and fear of abandonment. The prosecution countered with a different portrait, a mother who carefully chose moments when she was alone with her sons, methodically pressing a blanket over their tiny faces. Each act, they argued, was premeditated. Each time she could have stopped, she chose instead to continue. To them, this was not mental illness but a cold determination. Faced with the possibility of death by lethal injection, Brittany made her decision. In a plea agreement, she admitted guilt to counts of murder and manslaughter. In exchange, the death penalty was taken off the table. The judge handed down a sentence of 37 years to life in prison. For Brittany, it meant she would likely spend the rest of her days behind bars. For the families and community, it meant justice had been served, but no true peace could be found. The moment of sentencing was heavy with silence. Joseph sat quietly, the man who had lost 3 sons and, in another sense, his wife as well. The echoes of what had happened would haunt not only him, but the entire town of Bel Fontaine for decades to come. When the trial ended, the courtroom fell silent, but the questions it raised did not. Legal analysts and psychologists began dissecting the case of Brittany Pilkington, trying to understand how jealousy, grief, and untreated trauma could merge into a storm that ended with 3 small coffins. From a legal perspective, the case highlighted the challenges of prosecuting filicide. The deaths of infants and children are often attributed first to natural causes, as happened with Tristan and Noah. This delay in recognizing a pattern gave Brittany the window to act again. Experts argued that more robust child death review systems might have saved lives. In Ohio, the case became a call for reforms, urging closer examination of repeated tragedies within the same household. Psychologists saw in Brittany a tragic figure molded by a lifetime of neglect and abuse. Reports suggested she grew up in an environment where she was never the focus of affection, never secure in love. That early deprivation may have shaped her into an adult who interpreted her husband's bond with their sons as rejection. To her, each smile or embrace between Joseph and the boys became proof that she was unwanted. Still, even sympathetic experts admitted that jealousy alone could not justify the acts. They described her as deeply depressed, socially isolated, and unable to seek help. Yet the fact remained. Brittany chose silence over seeking therapy, blankets over conversation, destruction over endurance. Her story revealed how untreated trauma can distort human emotion into something lethal. For criminologists, the case reinforced how filicide often hides behind the facade of family. The perpetrator is not a stranger but a parent, someone the victims should have trusted most. These crimes challenge our assumptions about safety and raise haunting questions about how communities can recognize danger when it grows inside the home. Beyond the experts, the public reaction was divided. Some saw Brittany as a monster, undeserving of mercy. Others, while condemning her actions, saw her as another victim of a cycle of abuse and neglect that society failed to break. Between those extremes lay the uneasy truth. 3 children were gone, and nothing could restore them. The case of Brittany Pilkington left an indelible mark on Ohio and beyond. 3 young boys, Tristan, Noah, and Gavin, were gone forever. Their lives cut short not by accident, not by illness, but by the very person meant to protect them. Their names became symbols of innocence stolen, reminders of how fragile safety can be within the walls of home. For the community of Bel Fontaine, the Pilkington house no longer represented the image of small-town simplicity. It became a haunted space, a cautionary tale whispered at church gatherings, at school events, and on quiet front porches. Parents hugged their children tighter, questioning how such horror could have unfolded next door without anyone stopping it. For Joseph Pilkington, the father left behind, the tragedy was twofold. He had lost his sons and, through her actions, also lost his wife. He carried the weight of survivor's guilt, wondering if he had overlooked signs, if he had given too much affection in ways that fueled Brittany's resentment. His grief became private, shielded from public view, but the shadow of those 13 months never left him. The legal outcome, 37 years to life in prison, brought a measure of accountability, but not closure. Justice, in its most technical form, had been served, but no sentence could restore 3 lives or erase the envy that had turned deadly. In the years that followed, the case continued to spark debate. Could intervention have prevented the deaths? Should social services or medical examiners have seen the pattern sooner? Was Brittany a calculating killer, or a broken woman crushed by jealousy and untreated trauma? Those questions remain unanswered, lingering like echoes in the halls of a courthouse long after the gavel fell. What is certain is that this story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, that love, when twisted by envy and neglect, can become indistinguishable from destruction. As we close this case, we are left with the question that always lingers at the edge of true crime. Was justice truly served, or did the system only arrive too late? If you believe stories like these matter, stories that ask us to look closely at justice, morality, and the fragility of human bonds, then subscribe to our channel Echoes of the Court and share your thoughts in the comments. Because in every verdict, in every sentence, there are always deeper truths waiting to be uncovered.